I never planned on being an activist. One thing leads to another, and now if there's a dolphin in trouble, anywhere in the world, my phone will ring.
Now I'd like to jump to the Cove. The opening 10 minutes transitions between several storylines, but it's done really smoothly and it's really fluid. And I was wondering, how did you, or I guess if you could give me insight in how you tackled this first opening 10 minutes in setting up the whole film? Because it's a very important thing for films to set everything up.
Yeah, I mean, I usually find that the first 10 minutes is the last thing that gets cracked in the edit process. Because that's always the point in the film where you have to get across so much exposition and introduce your main characters, so much stuff that has to get done in that time that it's really hard to make it engaging.
Science has been tantalized for years at the prospect of talking to the most intelligent creatures on Earth, which may not be human beings.
A small group of scientists.
For a long time, the first 10 minutes were very simply what you would come up with on a paper cut, which was we opened the movie on a montage of dolphins with all the scientific voices talking about how intelligent they are. And that was the opening credit sequence. And then we went right into Rick's story.
In March of this year, O'Berry was arrested 3 times in Florida for trying to free some captive dolphins.
There's Rick, there's Louis, there's the town of Taiji, there's the dolphins. So there's a lot of characters that have to get it set up and a lot of information. And we also had at one point a voiceover track that was guiding the audience through, you know, like Rick's backstory and Louis' backstory and things like that. We're now 13 minutes into the movie and we've just gotten to Taiji. What we found is it was just too many different steps to get to the main point, which was Taiji. So we stripped away the voiceover because it was basically the voiceover telling the story of Louis, telling the story of Rick, telling the story of Taiji, which is the story of the dolphins. And all those things need to be introduced in the first act, but it's just too many voices. You know, all the shots are very similar to what's in the final film, but it is really boring because it's just information. A big click moment was when we figured out to start with a little bit of a cold open to kind of tease the audience into the tone of the movie.
I do want to say that we try to do the story legally.
That there is this very interesting night mission that will happen later in the film and kind of hook you in your seat. And then all of that stuff is about keeping the audience engaged. The thermal camera stuff as the opening credits is just because it's interesting to look at. Where we meet Louis and Rick right away in the car together. So here's our 2 characters. Keep it a little bit mysterious.
I thought, you know, what am I doing? I went halfway across the world to end up in this car locked up with this paranoid guy.
Somebody's behind me. I don't know who that is.
Yeah, and so the car ride where Rick is giving Louis a tour of Taiji ended up becoming kind of the spine for that whole section, because using that kind of to go back and forth, we jumped off into the very sort of simple exposition. Now, just stick around because you'll get all the information you need, and then when we come back to the end of that car ride, we're pointing out the Cove where the slaughter takes place.
But it doesn't feel like exposition. That's why I was so...
Well, that's the trick
Yeah.
in any movie, is finding a way to introduce the characters and introduce the exposition in such a way that it feels like it's part of the story of the character and not just a checklist of things that you need to know before we move on to the second act. And that beauty montage of the dolphins and the intelligence would seem to be the logical place to start for a movie about dolphins, but ended up being much better served later in the film. By the time we got to the actual killing of the dolphins, people would say, yes, it's brutal and it's really hard to watch, it's terrible, but we didn't really care about the dolphins. And that's because we had all that dolphin intelligence stuff right at the top of the movie when you're just settling into your seat.
There's something visceral about being in the water with an animal like this. As a scientist, I'm trained to recognize intelligence through objective measures, tool use, cognitive processes, and so on. As a human being, when I see a dolphin looking at me and his eyes tracking me, and I lock eyes with that animal, there's a human response that makes it undeniable that I'm connecting with an intelligent being.
But it's wasted at that point in the film.
Because it's essentially just overloading the beginning.
Yeah, it just becomes like, you know, filler for the credits, you know, and just by removing that from the opening, we then had it on a clipboard basically, and we could find the most strategic place to put it so that it would have the most impact and actually make the audience care again about the dolphins.
It's not about intelligence. It's about consciousness. They are self-aware like humans are self-aware. That means that we look in the mirror and we know exactly what we're looking at. I don't believe that the fishermen here are aware of that. When they're in that killing cove and their babies are being slaughtered in front of them, they're aware of that. They can anticipate what's going to happen to them.